It would be an honor to have Premier Smith here, but having Premier Smith would be speaking from the government level. What I wanted to try to capture as the UCP party goes into their provincial convention this weekend in Edmonton, I wanted to get a grassroots level, and I believe that that's where both you, Tim, as the president of Olds Didsbury Three Hills, and yourself, Rob, as the president of the party, can actually help Canada understand what's going on in Alberta right now. Hey Canada, welcome back and welcome to all our new subscribers. Today we've got a very special edition of Unfiltered. Alberta walking into a massive weekend with the UCP convention, and the stakes heading into election year 2027 couldn't be higher. But before we bring on our guests, I want to show you something. It's the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, and NDP leader Nenshi in question period, talking pipelines, jobs, and the future of Alberta's economy. And honestly, you gotta wonder, is this the preview of what Alberta is walking into in 2027?
In an age of AI and automation destroying jobs, can the Premier tell us what commitments she has from producers that if they increase production, they'll increase jobs?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think that Albertans would be interested in knowing whether the members opposite support us in trying to get a deal with the federal government so that we can increase pipelines. Because they sure didn't support Northern Gateway the first time that it came through. They sure didn't support Keystone XL. In fact, they allowed for these bad laws to come in one by one and chase 2.5 million barrels per day of investment outside of the country. So I would welcome it to see if the member opposite would finally support pipeline development, would stand up to Abby Lewis, this future leader of his party, who said there doesn't need to be any oil.
Well, there's Premier Smith and Naheed Nenshi sparring in the legislature. Naheed Nenshi bringing up AI and jobs, and Premier Smith really asking the important question, and that is, will you support a pipeline? And that's where the jobs come from, in my opinion. And that brings us to potentially what we'll see in 2027 and why we've got the two gentlemen on this special edition of Unfiltered today. We've got the president of the Olds Didsbury Three Hills Constituency Association, Tim Arnold. Tim, welcome back to Unfiltered.
Thank you, Dan.
And we've got the president of the United Conservative Party, Rob Smith. Rob, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule campaigning to be on the show here today.
Thanks, Dan. I'm happy to be here, and really happy to be here with my great friend Tim as well. I appreciate it.
So, Rob, Tim was telling me before we started the show that you were the former president of the Olds Didsbury Three Hills constituency as well then.
Yes, it's true. Tim and I actually were founding members of the Olds Didsbury Three Hills UCP Constituency Association. He coming from the Wild Rose side, me coming from the PC side. And I think we're two of only 3 or 4 that actually remain from those kind of mid-teens dates when we first started talking about this in 2016 and 17. And honestly, Olds Didsbury Three Hills created our own terms of reference and our own bylaws before the provincial party had even united. So we were doing things a little ahead of schedule in Olds Didsbury Three Hills. So Tim and I have a little history.
That's awesome. Well, I'm glad you're both here because, it would be an honor to have Premier Smith here, but having Premier Smith would be speaking from the government level. What I wanted to try to capture as the UCP party goes into their provincial convention this weekend in Edmonton, I wanted to get a grassroots level, and I believe that that's where both you, Tim, as the president of Olds Didsbury Three Hills, and yourself, Rob, as the president of the party, can actually help Canada understand what's going on in Alberta right now. Because in our comment section in the National Town Hall at Unfiltered, I got to tell you, I get a lot of questions about what's really going on in Alberta. Do you, both of you, Tim, I'll start with you. Tim, do you feel from a provincial level there's a lot of noise right now in this province?
There's all kinds of noise created by all kinds of factions. And, there's some good positive discussion, and then there's a lot of negativity. And, we've gone through an interesting time with the whole teacher event. And now the government's brought down some really powerful and strong legislation working on those things with parental rights and children and so on. And it's created some noise. And of course, we have the left that's swinging wildly, at all kinds of things. So we have lots of noise. And then we have the group that feels like a very small group that thinks we should be the 51st state. Don't hear much from them now. But you hear more from the group that thinks we should be independent, as in our own country. Anyway, there's all kinds of stuff going on.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the potential separation of stay in Canada coming up here in a minute. But Rob, just from your perspective, 50,000-foot view, being the president of the party, where a lot of eyes in Canada and in the United States are on Alberta right now, does that put you under a lot of pressure with regards to the volunteer, the grassroots level of the party?
Well, Dan, one of the things that I always somewhat joke about when I'm meeting with our UCP caucus, as well as the UCP, really the government, the executive committee, the cabinet, and the premier, is I consider our job within the party to be so much easier than theirs, because all that we need to do is ensure that we are representing the perspective of our 85,000 members across the province, where the government, they need to be mindful of absolutely every Albertan that there is. However, I would say that since the federal election at the end of April, that there has been, when Tim talks about noise, and you talk about that as well, there has been a substantial amount of broad-based opinions about what Alberta's place is in the Confederacy, and what a lot of Albertans perceive as a lack of respect from the rest of the country for the degree to which we contribute to the economy. Now, one of the things, though, that's really important for me to tell you, going back to the very first question that you kind of leveled at Tim, I've had the opportunity through different personal and professional opportunities to travel this country from coast to coast, actually. When I worked with the Canadian Angus Association, I was serving members from BC right through to the Maritimes, and I even attended a convention in Newfoundland. So I've been in every province. I haven't been in the territories. But one of the things that I found really interesting is that you are absolutely correct. There are people across Canada that don't really understand why it is that Alberta seems angry all the time, or why it is Alberta seems to believe that they are a distinct society, when our country kind of rejected that terminology, 30 plus years ago when it came to La Belle Province in terms of Quebec. But when I have the opportunity to speak with Canadians, one of the things that it becomes very clear to me is when Albertans get frustrated, it actually isn't about fellow Canadians. When I'm visiting with people that are rural Ontarians, it's like I'm talking to rural Albertans. What brings us together is far broader than what separates us. And so it's important to me that Canadians understand that what Alberta's primary issue isn't with the rest of Canada and Canadians. It's absolutely with the federal government. And I think made much more manifest when our federal government is a Liberal government, recognizing that there are kind of challenges for Alberta within the Confederacy period. But when we have a Liberal government, particularly like we've had for the last 10 years, and I don't believe that it's any better under Carney than it was under Trudeau. In fact, in many ways, because he's infinitely more intelligent, I think it's actually worse. And of the three of us, who would have thought we were as kids living through the good Trudeau? I mean, none of us ever thought that back in the 1970s and the 80s. But the issue truly is with the federal government, and that Alberta doesn't feel that it gets a fair shake. It's not about Canada or Canadians as a people or even as a culture. It's actually about the laws of our federal government and the fact that we feel like we're under the thumb of the federal government. And if you go back to when I'm not even sure, Dan, that you would have much firsthand recollection of this just by virtue of age, but the anger in the Western alienation when the national energy policy was proposed in the late 70s and then rolled out after the short-term Joe Clark government federally, and then Trudeau did try to make it happen. I think that probably the most professional and polished premier we've ever had was Peter Lougheed, and the national energy policy made him into, as wild a Westerner as I think you could possibly have, because of the degree to which it was truly exploiting Alberta and ultimately Albertans. And so I feel that since that time, there has been a bit of an undercurrent or an underpinning that has come to us generation after generation in Alberta, that when the federal government seems to want to stifle us, like it certainly has in terms of our natural resource development in the last 10 years with tanker bans and production caps, we get a little unhappy and a little angry. And that's what Canadians are seeing.
It seems to me, and gentlemen, correct me if I'm wrong, Tim would like your thoughts on this too, but Lougheed, yes, and then Klein. And then there seems to be a period in Alberta where there was, just some maybe a vacuum with regards to national scale, this, squeezing of the thumb. And then in comes Jason Kenney, starts the momentum back to, hey, stay in your lane. And then it seems like Premier Smith has really taken that up another notch. Tim, would you agree with that?
Very much so, but it's response to who the federal government was. The era you're talking about, a number of those years, we had a conservative federal government, and they weren't coming up with tanker bans and absolutely crushing the idea of pipelines and so on, and high taxes and emissions caps and that sort of thing. And so there wasn't the same urgency that there is in Alberta today. And so the current federal government and the previous one, since the Trudeau, has amplified all of that, magnified it all, and now we have a premier that is actually, I believe, pushing back in ways that are effective, not just writing letters.
Good point. So looking ahead then to this weekend in Alberta, the UCP is getting ready for their annual convention. I was at last year's convention. Unfiltered will be at this year's convention in Edmonton as well. Is like last year, Danielle, Premier Smith received over 90% leadership review positive, right? Are the stakes higher this year with everything that's going on between what's happening federally, between this referendum question, the Jeff Rath group, the Thomas Lukaszuk group? Is this one going to be different? Rob, I'll give that to you.
I think it will be a little different, but I think that it's also, as you pointed out, I think quite critical, because when I talk about going back to spring and the broad-based opinions that started permeating out of our entire province, well, Dan, they started permeating out of our membership as well. And one of the things that we know as conservatives is that united we win and divided we lose. And it's just that simple. If you look at our federal Conservative Party, when we divided in the early 1990s, we had about 13 years of there being a bit of a conservative wasteland from a federal perspective. Now, fortunately, the Jean Chrétien federal government was actually fiscally a pretty responsible government. And while we could beat up on them just because they were liberals, in terms of responsible government, they weren't that bad. I mean, certainly compared to what we had with the old Trudeau and the new Trudeau and Carney, Alberta didn't feel, as you pointed out, near that level of disenfranchisement. So one of the things that's so important about our gathering this weekend is that we recognize that as the United Conservative Party, we are a broad tent, welcoming everyone from right of center conservatives all the way to as far right of conservatives as can be, and recognizing, as Tim pointed out, that our premier is walking a really, really fine line. And I think she's doing it exceptionally well, because every single day I talk to members of our party who on the one hand refer to her as someone who's not willing to go far enough and not willing to stand up for Alberta rights and Alberta independence. And the very next phone call will be people referring to her as Separatist Smith. And I think that this really challenging line she's walking, she's doing exceptionally well in terms of building leverage. When people say that our premier is anti-independence, she does not have an independence mandate. She ran for the provincial party that is, at this point in time, a federalist-based party. We have never had a conversation as a party about independence. And until such time as Albertans actually have an opinion on that, I don't believe that we should, because we have at the least 25%, and perhaps even more than 1/3 of our membership, who believe that Alberta's place is within Canada, is within our current federalist system. And I don't want to run the risk of alienating, even though I know it's perhaps a minority within our membership. I don't want to alienate what could be anywhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of our members. By the same token, if the majority of our members actually do favor independence, at the most, or at the least, certainly more sovereignty within a united Canada, I don't want to run the risk of offending those folks either. And I believe Premier is masterful in actually trying to straddle those lines and do everything in an incremental way to ensure that Alberta gets its absolute best shake in Canada. There's going to be, I believe, an announcement on Thursday that I think Premier's going to be excited about going into the weekend with. And if that doesn't happen, you can bet that it's going to color her remarks in terms of what we're going to hear from her. And I don't believe that if our members are reasonable and if they're actually thinking about the long term, that they should be disappointed in anything she's going to talk about, because there is no way that Premier Smith puts Canada over Alberta. She is a stated federalist. She supports Alberta's place in Confederation, but she puts Alberta first. And no one will ever convince me of anything different.
You know, this channel is still quite young, Rob. It started about May 6th, right when Carney got elected. Coincidence? I think not. But one thing that I have been watching closely is Premier Smith, the province of Alberta, this separation conversation. And I have never found a single video where she hasn't said other than, if the people want a question, we'll give them the question, the people will decide.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
She has never wavered from that, ever.
We have a premier that is so committed to listening to Albertans. I don't know that we've ever had a leader in Alberta, or maybe one in Canada, that is as committed to the people as this current premier. She's an active member of our provincial UCP board. It's rare that she misses meetings. We hold a meeting once a month by Zoom with all 87 of our constituency association presidents, where they have the opportunity for an hour to an hour and a half, sometimes a little more, to engage with the premier, to ask her face-to-face questions, and as well as provide statements. Tim's had the opportunity for the past couple of years to be part of this, and she never misses. And she doesn't talk down, she doesn't talk over. Tim and I sat on the provincial or on the Old Stittsbury Three Hills board when one time our former premier joined us, and he and I were texting back and forth saying, this guy doesn't get it. I mean, he's not hearing what any of us are trying to say. Tim was actually trying to provide the George and Martha coaching that Klein used to talk about, and he just totally didn't get it. This premier not only gets it, she celebrates it, and she wants it. So you're right on the money. She wants to know what Albertans want, and she will lay every opportunity out for Albertans to have that say. That's why the thresholds have been lowered on things like a provincial referendum, or even, I mean, perhaps this is a bit of a double-edged sword, but the recall legislation. She's made it so Albertans truly can make a difference.
Tim, you're on the ground floor level. Constituency president, Old Stittsbury Three Hills. I know you're active in, giving advice and helping out other CAs as well. You're very respected within the community of the United Conservative Party and outside of it, frankly. Are you hearing concern about this separation conversation, or, within a Canada conversation that Thomas Lukaszuk has just wrapped up his getting the required signatures for his referendum? What are you hearing?
Dan, quite honestly, I hear more of the side that want either more sovereignty within Canada or separate from Canada. I hear more from those people than I do the ones that want to stay in Canada. I think that's probably more rural Alberta overall. That would be my guess. I think I'm not speaking on behalf of our board. My opinion is that we need more sovereignty within Canada, and maybe down the road we need to be extracting ourselves from Canada, but that's way down the road, and there's a lot of stuff to happen in between. And my position and what I tell people is I think our premier is doing a very good job, and until she fails and we get nothing, and it's very clear that this is all dead in the water, so to speak, in terms of building pipelines, getting resource to water, all of these different aspects, until it's clear that none of it's going to happen. I'm all about supporting her and her efforts, because no premier has made the efforts and gone the distance that she has. And strategically, it's very interesting to watch. As I said, it's a lot more than strongly worded letters.
You've got to give her some credit.
I have great appreciation. I'm just going to say I have great appreciation and respect for her. And again, I'm in a rural setting. People I talk to are supportive, very supportive of her, unless they're the really strong, we're out of here. And even those guys are like, support her in every other way. There's a lot of respect for her leadership.
You have to realize, and some people maybe don't realize that, because they're not invested in politics until they have to make their vote, right? Until it's election time. But Premier Smith, yes, she is the leader of the United Conservative Party, but every premier across this country, whether they get it or not, Premier Eby, you are the premier for the province, for all people, all walks of life, all backgrounds, she gets that. I really, really believe she understands that, and it means a lot to her, and it is a weight on her, I believe, my opinion. Rob?
Dan, I think you're absolutely right. And there's a phrase that is often used more in the United States that talks about low information voters. But that's exactly what you're referring to when you talk about, people have a tendency to only become really thoughtful or really engaged in what's going on when it comes time to vote. And let's remember that there are, sometimes a third or more of our population that don't even get involved then. And our government has to rule for all of those people, whether they're conservative or not, whether they're even involved or engaged in public policy or not. And so I think that you're right on the money that our premier and I believe our current government are super mindful about that. And I know that that's where the frustration comes from for some of our party members. And when Tim talks about the people that are ready for independence tomorrow, one of the things that I have talked about a lot in recent weeks is members of our party are not those low information voters. The members of our United Conservative Party are incredibly sophisticated and incredibly aware of everything that's going on. And because of that, because they have more information, it feeds their desire to see things move faster. But our membership, it's important for them to realize that they are actually the elite who understand and have an opinion on what's going on because their level of awareness is up here. And the premier and the work of government can't just be for those folks because that's how revolution happens when people who were formerly completely uninvolved, that don't really know much, end up being attracted to forces of evil or mistruths and untruths that then whip them into a frenzy to oppose the sitting government, because the sitting government didn't do a good enough job of engaging the whole of people with an information campaign about what's going on. And we know that revolution, usually doesn't end up very well. It usually ends up having a real negative effect on the people. So Premier, I think, is working really hard on an incremental basis to try to create as much awareness with people as she possibly can. And we know that our typical media is really, really challenging for any form of conservatism, whether you are, just right of center, like say Doug Ford in Ontario, or whether you are running a more traditional conservative type government, like I think Premier Smith is doing. Mainstream media is going to be nothing but hurtful rather than helpful. So thank heavens for alternate media, and thank heavens for the fact that we have a leader that actually is pretty cunning and capable of engaging with all sorts of those public or somewhat private media forms to help get that word out as much as possible so that people can understand, because Premier is an extremely effective communicator, and I feel very blessed that we have that.
We only have a couple of minutes left here, guys. A couple of questions before we wrap this up. And we're gonna do a stress test with you, Rob, here in just a second from the 50,000-foot view. Tim, as the president of the Constituency Association, in under 1 minute, what are you hoping to get out of the convention this weekend in Edmonton?
I'm hoping to get some great news from the Premier in regards to the federal government. That'd be amazing. What I'm really hoping for is that we come out of it united. I'm hoping we come out of it with a provincial board that's elected that is a board that can work together, because it's very key. We all know a divisive board, it's a challenge, because the board, they don't dictate to the government at all, but they are the relayer of information from us to the government and to the caucus and to the Premier's office and the Premier and so on. And so I'm looking for a board that comes out of there that is stable, that is able to look at all sides of this equation, because the separation, we'll call it, it's out there, no question. And there is a group that is adamant about it. And I guess my personal desire is that they get about as much recognition as 1905 did last year in the convention, and that's pretty much zero.
Okay.
We need a united board that is stable and that looks at this in the big picture, not short-term knee-jerk reaction.
Rob, stress test, 50,000-foot view, not from a government perspective, but from the president of the party's perspective. You know, when you look at the legacy media right now, they're really painting this angry picture between BC and Alberta, this team building picture between Alberta, Saskatchewan, and this on again, off again relationship with Doug Ford in the province of Ontario. How is it, the relationship side between the three provinces and Alberta, would you feel from a 50,000-foot view party perspective? Let the rest of Canada know that, you know, we're all trying to play nice in the sandbox, I think.
So, Dan, it's a great point. And it's a great question. There's actually folks from the BC Conservative Association or Party that are going to be at our AGM. They come as guests every year, and we're always happy to have them. And we share ideas about how we work on things together. One of the real, I tend to think that conservative governments, and this is a big frustration for me, conservative governments tend to be more about consensus building than left-wing governments ever are, particularly the NDP. But I mean, even Liberals as the centrist party, I think when I was speaking somewhat complimentarily about Jean Chrétien a little while ago, he actually ran a federal government that was relatively consensus building. Now, he did it at a time when conservatives were virtually dead in the water because we were so divided. We didn't really have much of a base from a federal perspective. Man, if you would have been Justin Trudeau at that point or Mark Carney at that point, could they have ever run roughshod over the whole of the country? Thank heavens that Chrétien was the leader at that time. Because if you look at the ideologue that Justin Trudeau was for the last 10 years, environmental this and that and the next thing, when Alberta has the cleanest produced natural resources in the whole of the world, and we've got cutting edge businesses who believe it's their social and cultural responsibility to actually do it in the cleanest way possible and still try to be economically efficient. Thank heavens that we've had corporations that would stand up for that. And I think that the majority of the nation now recognizes what an ideological zealot Justin Trudeau was. It disappoints me that they seem to think Carney is highly differentiated when his government is still largely the same. The former environment minister is still there. There's a number of those people that are still sitting in cabinet. So, I mean, you've all heard that phrase about the lipstick on a pig. It feels to me like this is lipstick on a pig, and I'm hoping that Canadians, and I think all Albertans are hoping that our friends across Canada, particularly those baby boomers who seem to really support Mark Carney back in April, will realize that lipstick on a pig is still a pig. And Alberta just wants us to be able to do what we do best, which is innovate, drive business, create economic incentive, look after its people, and look after our environment. There's no conservative in Alberta or Albertan period that wants to not do that. But we want to be able to do it the best way we can without the oppressive pushback coming from the federal government when countries around the world that are far more responsible for emissions and far more responsible for human rights violations are actually doing things in ramping their industrial complexes up while we're being forced to reduce ours, even though it is so responsible. So, I mean, Canada, please just understand that Alberta wants to contribute to our country the best way we can. Just try to work with us rather than supporting governments that want to work against us. And I guess from a party perspective, going back to what Tim was talking about, I totally agree with Tim. Unity is our only way forward. And the greatest professional compliment I've ever been given is that I'm a consensus builder. Most people don't know where I sit on a topic. A lot of people don't even know where I sit on independence. Dan, that's completely by design because my own agenda doesn't exist. I want to serve this party to represent the people so that in October 2027, when our next provincial election comes, not only do we sweep rural Alberta, we go back to sweeping pretty much all of Calgary, and we get maybe not just a foothold, but maybe a whole handhold in Edmonton. Because, I mean, people who want to write off Edmonton, let's remember how they vote federally. And let's think back through the history of the provincial Conservative parties. They have voted majority provincially in the past. We just need to do better at connecting with Edmontonians so they understand that our party is their party. And that's our task that we got to work on. And like you said, we've now got 23 months to do it. So time is of the essence.
I was going to give you the floor to let United Conservatives who might be watching this why they should vote for you for president, but I think you just said it. I
was taking your 2 minutes seriously. I thought I needed to get it in.
Rob, you are running for president again. Is that correct?
It's true. Yes.
Well, good luck with that. Based on what you just said, if there's anything else you'd like to add, we've got about 2 minutes left. So go ahead.
Well, I think that that Tim raises a great point about our board being focused on the party and being focused on our membership. One of the things that we found coming out of the pandemic that I think while the pandemic was horrible, and there's lots of conversations, and I'm sure you've had them on your show about what that should have looked like as opposed to what it did look like, but it did galvanize thousands of Albertans to actually want to become involved from a political perspective, from a public policy perspective. You know, this weekend, Dan, there are 35 policies that our members have rated out of like almost 1,100 that are going to come to the floor of the plenary. There's another 20 policies, 20 of the top 25 governance policies that they're going to vote on Friday. Our people in the United Conservative Party are policy crazy because they care, because going back to what I said before, they're pretty sophisticated Albertans in terms of understanding public policy and what Albertans and Alberta needs, I think particularly within a united Canada. So I'm excited for the debate on that. Last year, all 35 of the policies passed. It'll be interesting to see if that's the case again this year. There's a great one that was the most popular with our membership, wanting the government to rethink its position on no-fault insurance. It's supposed to come effective January 1, 2027. I think there's going to be great debate on that, and I hope the government does rethink its position based on what the members say. But we need a board of directors that's actually going to be committed to ensuring that all the members' perspective is represented. And that means our middle ground conservatives and our more traditional, maybe progressive conservatives, as well as our hard as nails, we got to get out of Canada conservatives, because together we can figure out what we need to do as a province, but we can only do that if we form government. And if we don't keep those factions together, we don't form government. And boy, oh boy, do we wake up with a terrible hangover, an orange hangover in October 2027, just like happened to us in May of 2015, if we're not careful and if we don't stay together.
Guys, we're going to have to end it there. That's Tim Arnold, president of the Olds Didsbury Three Hills Constituency Association and president of the United Conservative Party, Rob Smith. Guys, thank you both for being here on Unfiltered. Really appreciate this special edition. Good luck this weekend. All right, Canada, that was a real conversation, not political sound bites, not the headlines, the actual boots on the ground perspective from the people who see their province up close. Alberta is walking into a huge weekend with the UCP convention, and whether you're in Alberta, Ontario, BC, or the East Coast, The decisions made this weekend will ripple across the whole country. And after hearing Tim and Rob today, one thing's clear. 2027 has already started. The referendum question, the national divide, the frustration, the identity. It's all real, and it's happening in real time. Unfiltered will be in Alberta this weekend on the ground at the UCP convention, bringing you the moments and conversations the rest of the country never sees. So make sure you're following all of our platforms with Unfiltered to stay connected. And hey, if you want the deeper story, make sure you subscribe to the Unfiltered Dispatch on Substack. That's where we break things down between the episodes. Thank you, Canada, for being a part of the National Town Hall. Now grab a coffee, hit subscribe, and stick around and watch one of these previous episodes from Unfiltered. Hopefully, we'll see you there.